Hi, hello, and welcome back to the Madness in Meeting podcast. I never introduce these episodes. I decided to today. I'm
It's a
deciding to
big
be brave.
day. It's a
It's
big
a
day.
I'm a new woman. I was gonna say I woke up a new woman, but I haven't slept. So I haven't woken up. I've actually just morphed.
You've woken up metaphorically into a
That is
woman that
true.
introduces the podcast.
That is very true. Yeah, which is funny because as you probably could tell, every time that you've asked me if you want me or you want if I want you to introduce the podcast, there's always a lot of resistance of me not wanting to do it for some reason. I'm like, no, you can do it. It's fine. You're like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, oh, you do it. It's fine. But you know what? Today we are exploring the topic of resistance. What resistance is, how it shows up in our life, the different ways that we respond to it, maybe our own personal experiences of it, wink, wink, more recently in our lives. And um, yeah, I think that this is, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin with this because it's such a big topic.
I think that I think that the concept of resistance might be an interesting place to start with this because resistance is a natural part of human existence in every capacity, and yet we make it so wrong. And the expectation is that like we float through life and it's a linear path and like we just figure it out and make it work. And if we struggle at any point, like massive shame
That's right.
is is elicited from that. And we look around us at our peers. Why are they not struggling? Why am I the only one dealing with this? How come the decisions I make continue to leave me in a place of feeling disempowered? Why can't I get my shit together? How am I? And like it kind of starts to spiral. And so I think to explore like how resistance can show up for us, what resistance really is, and then how to work with it so that it no longer takes a hold on you and kind of you no longer descend into this kind of dark place of despair. And sometimes that's part of the
That's
process and that's what's
purposeful.
needed. But I think when we can all allow resistance to just be a part of the human experience, that will create a very different way of being and make this
Yeah.
whole experience of humanity, human life, a lot more enjoyable. And the expectations of it will be different too.
And this topic idea came to you because of things that you've witnessed in the coaching industry specifically. And obviously, we're not just going to apply this to like how this shows up being a coach or like as a person that's being coached, but I think maybe that could be a good way of even defining what that can look like, what resistance is and what it can look like, and also how it is that we typically like what our relationship to it typically is based on how you've seen other people in our field who work with people for a living and therefore, help people through a life transition or something like that, some kind of life transformation where there's inevitably going to be resistance that comes up, how that's typically talked about and dealt with. So, do you want to start there?
Sure. So I'll use myself as an example as the client because I've experienced my fair share of resistance working with coaches as being the client, and then witnessing myself in resistance, and then witnessing them in resistance of me while I'm in resistance. And then I've also experienced it on the flip side where I'm the coach working with a client who's in resistance and then being in resistance to them, in
Right.
resistance to themselves, and then in resistance to me. So I can speak from it from both sides, but I'm going to start from myself as the client. Um, Recently, I had an experience with a coach where I noticed in my work with this person that I, it was very rarely in the moment that I noticed, but it was watching back the footage of the session, which is a lot of the times very important to do because when you're in the moment, it's really difficult to have the awareness of what's happening because you're so deep inside of it. So I would watch these sessions back and see myself coming up with reasons why everything was difficult for me and nothing would work for me. And it didn't matter what idea was put forward, I would shut it down right away.
Been there.
And yeah, and I noticed that in myself that that was a pattern that I have that I didn't know was there. And I was like, it doesn't matter what she said to me, how she said it to me. I would come up with the reason why it wasn't feasible, it wouldn't work for me, why it was harder for me than for everybody else, why it wouldn't lead to the end result that I wanted. And that was really interesting to watch. And then watching it, I could tell that she was frustrated with me. In the moment, I could sense her frustration with me. And then as I watched it back, I was frustrated with me. So there was a lot of different dynamics at play there, but we could start with that, which is this pattern that I have of being in resistance to making decisions because what I'm telling myself is that nothing's going to work and it's harder for me than it is for everybody else. But there's something going on there beneath the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it feels like some kind of internal threat. And I don't know if that resonates with you, but when I try to peel back the layers of my own experience of this, where it's like I'm coming to someone with a problem, they're giving me ideas or potential
Yeah.
resolutions, and I'm like, nope, 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 that's
Yeah.
not gonna work. That's not gonna work. It's like every single one, like it feels like a hit in my stomach that gets activated where it's like that leads down a dark path. It's like, no, that won't work because I won't have enough money, or no, that won't work because this thing happened in the past that proves that that's not going to happen for me. And like, there's always these like grips in my stomach somatically that feel like a warning in some, and it's not like an actual warning. It just feels like this like red flag, like threat inside of my body that says, no, that's not safe, or something that's going to lead somewhere that feels unsafe. And to me, I always connect that back with, I'm sure we've talked about this in previous episodes, like my brain likes to associate these things with the core needs of the personality because it makes a lot of sense to me how almost every trigger, every point of resistance is leading back to one of our core needs of the personality feeling threatened. So either my need for certainty feels threatened, there's something about in this specific dynamic, someone giving me this idea, that idea feels threatening to my ability to feel certain or to be able to predict a certain outcome. So that core need of certainty and safety feels threatened. Or there's something about it that I've attached meaning to the idea that they gave me that's a threat to my sense of significance. Like it's going to mean my value depreciates as a person, or my self-worth depreciates as a person, or it's going to take away something in my life that I've associated with my value. And so that feels like a threat to my significance. That's one of the core needs. There's also the core need of love and connection. And so there might be a meaning I've attached to their idea automatically without even realizing it. That makes me feel less worthy of love, or that love is going to be taken away, or connection is going to be taken away, or it could even just be as simple as that idea is going to make me too busy or too overwhelmed or affect my relationships. So that now feels threatened, love and connection, or that core need for uncertainty, which is to have variety, freedom, spontaneity. And so maybe there's something about the idea they're offering me that my mind is creating meaning around, that I'm going to be restricted, or my freedom is going to be taken away from me, or something along those lines. And maybe there's more aspects to it, but those are kind of the four that I always relate it back to, where whenever I'm in that state of resistance to people giving me ideas, my mind always justifies throwing it away based on a meaning my mind has attached to it, that something that I need is going to be taken away.
Yeah. Ultimately, resistance is discomfort. There's a discomfort that's present that feels painful beneath the surface. And what you're trying to do by resisting someone else's ideas for something like what I was doing was avoiding feeling whatever, or facing whatever pain and discomfort is really there. So if I can shut the idea down before having a chance to look at it and really feel the discomfort associated with doing it or going in that direction, then I don't have to. And so
Mhm.
I think that this pattern of resistance is a very subtle way that we protect ourselves from pain. And that's really ultimately what it comes down to. Which pain point it is will depend on the person and depend on their core need, which is a result of past experiences or conditioned belief systems or memories that you have. But ultimately, resistance is a protection from pain. And for me, just to give you an idea for in that scenario, what was happening for me was all of these ideas required me to do something way outside of my comfort zone. And that would put me in a position where I could potentially be misunderstood or rejected. And that was ultimately what I was fearing doing. There was nothing stopping me from doing any of those ideas. They were all perfectly fine and good. But if I shut them down immediately, then I would never be faced with those painful realities. And that's ultimately what I didn't want to feel in that moment was the discomfort of those potential outcomes.
And then how were you met in that moment when you started to feel the resistance? You mentioned that now you feel the resistance from someone else. So do you want to go into that dynamic now?
Sure, yeah. So whenever we witness someone else grappling with their own resistance of something, if we feel uncomfortable watching them grapple with that, it's because we're not comfortable with our own sense of resistance and in whatever they're reflecting back to us around what our pain point might be. And I could tell that she was getting frustrated with this pattern of me shutting down her ideas because she could see the pattern. But I don't know that she knew how to hold space for me while I moved through it. And I could tell that she was then in resistance to her own discomfort, where she was feeling inadequate as a coach. And I could both sense my own discomfort inside of the dynamic and sense her discomfort inside of the dynamic. And it's very important for me. One of my core needs is to feel valuable and significant. And inside of a relationship dynamic, especially with a coach, I want them to like me. I want to release, I want to resist. Are you nodding your head because you remember that about me or because that resonates for you?
It was more for the latter, actually, but now that you mentioned the former, yeah, maybe a bit of that too.
It's very important for me and I've always been this way. Going back to grade school, I remember like on the first day of school, I would show up and be like, I'm gonna work really hard because I want my teacher to like me. And I didn't recognize that at the time, but looking back, that was definitely present. I want my superior to like me. I want to receive their validation because that is a pain point for me where I'm not able to fully show that to myself. And so I could tell that I was bothering her, annoying her. I was a source of discomfort for her. And that compounded the shame and judgment that I was feeling in that moment, where I didn't feel safe to express how I was really feeling. I didn't feel safe exploring it deeper. I didn't feel seen and heard fully, and I felt this need to protect myself even more. So I kind of doubled down on what I was saying, and I came up with all of these reasons why what I was saying was valid because I
Yeah.
was judging her response of me and feeling responsible for her not liking me in that moment.
Yeah. It's just an endless loop of resistance.
Yeah.
You feel resistance and she feels resistance over your resistance, or you feel resistance over her resistance of
Yeah.
your resistance.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, and coming into the coach's side, like we've both been in experiences where we've watched someone that we're holding space for have resistance and then feel our own resistance arise from that. That has been such a growth edge for me in my career as a coach. And I think I've come a long ways with it, and there have been very pivotal moments, pivotal client experiences in my coaching career that have shaped my ability to create separation from my internal experience of what their internal experience is. But when I was so invested and leaning into their own resistance and making it my own, it was very much coming from a place of me feeling threatened, that because they were triggered or because they were resistant, it was because it meant I wasn't doing good enough, or it meant that I wasn't actually good at what I was doing. Those were kind of the automatic meanings I was attaching to it. Kind of the story that, like, if I'm making their life harder, or if I'm bringing up something in them that feels difficult to feel, then I'm doing something wrong. And that felt amplified by the fact that, and also they're paying me, and also they're paying me generally to help them feel better in their lives. And so in this very moment, I feel like I'm failing them. I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job. I feel like a imposter in some way. And so then I was making it my responsibility to fix their resistance so that I wouldn't have to feel my own pain that I was feeling. And it took a lot of work to be able to mainly just come to a place where I can see that resistance is actually not a problem, and that it's not actually getting in the way of them feeling good. It's actually something they need to move through in order for them to get to what they've been working on and what we've been working on together. Then that a relationship with it has allowed me to take a step back and then also start leading in with curiosity rather than I need to take this away, but like, ooh, what's this?
This is exactly where I wanted to go next.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's this misunderstanding when you hire a coach or a therapist or a healer, or you embark on your own personal development healing journey, that you're going to feel much better. And the expectation is, if I'm going to hire this person and I'm going to do this work, I'm going to feel better. And I want to challenge that a little bit, because that's not necessarily how it works. You have to look at what's creating the discomfort in the first place. And looking at what's creating the discomfort allows you to find peace inside of it. But in order to get to the peace that's available for you, you have to sit with and feel and explore the discomfort. And along with doing that is going to come resistance to that entire process, because no one wants to feel more uncomfortable when the whole point is to feel comfortable. And if there's discomfort anywhere along this process, the discomfort, if there's resistance anywhere along this process, that is literally showing you the doorway in to the peace that you're looking to feel. The resistance is not the problem, the resistance is the way.
Mhm.
Because where there's resistance, there's pain. And the pain is what's preventing you from accessing peace or freedom, whatever you're looking for on the other side of that. And so the resistance is actually incredibly important, and almost a gift that you are noticing is there, because when you can see where the resistance is, you can see where the path towards peace,
Yeah.
freedom, and love is found.
And the most important part of that there's pain behind the resistance, is acknowledging that the pain was already there. Like it was
Yes.
something that you were carrying, that this circumstance, this other person, these ideas that they're offering you are just bringing up. They're provoking them inside of you, but they were already there. Like there was a part of my ability to start stepping back from that over responsibility of my clients getting triggered, that came from me just recognizing that if they're getting triggered or they're feeling resistance, it's because I'm bringing up something in them that was already there. I'm not making their life more difficult or giving them something that they don't like. I'm just invoking that in them, and that's beneficial because up until now they didn't know that was there. And if it's
Right.
been there and they didn't know it was there, there's absolutely no way that hasn't been holding them back in their life. And so I'm already doing them a favor by showing them that it's there.
Yeah. And this is something that I have grappled with, especially when I first started doing kind of like a deeper sense of nutrition coaching with my clients, where I wasn't just giving them the program to follow. I wanted to get to the root of why they couldn't just follow the program in the first place. Because if you're telling yourself that there's something that you want and you continue to do the opposite of what you're telling yourself that you want, there's something going on there. There's a reason why. That's a form of resistance. You want something, and yet you're not taking the action that's required in order for you to get there. Why? And I was met with resistance from my clients in exploring that further. And that was something that continued to come up for me inside of the work that I was doing with clients. And for a long time, I took that personally, where it was, oh my God, I'm a horrible coach because my clients have so much resistance inside of the work I'm trying to do with them. And other, healers, therapists, coaches must not have this problem. What's wrong with me? And I realized nothing.
Yeah.
It was part of the work I was doing was calling attention to the discomfort, calling attention to the resistance and shining a spotlight on it where they may not have previously done or wanted to do. And that's just part of the work that I do with clients. And what I focus on inside of myself is, where am I feeling uncomfortable and how can I be with that so that it's no longer, one, as intense, and two, operating from an unconscious place and running my life as a byproduct.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to look at all of the different layers of resistance that show up in a just a two-person dynamic that we're exploring here, both from the client side and the coaching side. And so, do you feel like there's any other aspect of this, both from being on the receptive side as the client and on being on the side of the coach or the facilitator, that we haven't explored yet?
I think it's really important to know what to do with the resistance when you can see it there. So, resistance can look like many different ways. It can look like being in opposition to the reality that you have, fighting against the nature of your own circumstances, wishing things were different than they are, but then also not taking any action to change them. It can be wanting to show up differently inside of a relationship, but then failing to or choosing not to. It can be noticing a discrepancy between how you want to be and what you're doing instead. So that's a form of resistance. Another form of resistance can be an example like what I shared, where someone is showing you the path forward, giving you all of this information, and you're saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not going to work for me. Or not wanting to address how you're really feeling in a given moment when you're given the opportunity to. And none of that is wrong. That is all just signs of resistance, but there's nothing wrong with resistance, because what we're exploring right now is that it's just a reflection of a pain point. And so I
Yeah.
guess the next part of this conversation is, what do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can share my story of very similarly to what you experienced, where someone was showing you a path forward and you came up with all the reasons to shut it down. And before we even started recording, you and I had a brief conversation exploring the idea of what's the difference between a trigger and resistance? Because they kind of felt like the same thing, like they could be used interchangeably, but there was something that felt kind of different about it. And you and I kind of landed on this idea that resistance is the discomfort that you feel, and trigger is kind of like the reaction to that discomfort that's very like forceful and deflective in a way. And so I had an experience of being massively and surprisingly triggered by something that somebody offered me a year ago when I had hired a therapist at the beginning of 2023. mainly because I just wanted some help clarifying what I wanted to do with my career and also help moving through all of the debilitating anxiety that was coming up for me around owning my own business and how that was getting in the way. And so mainly I just wanted him to help me, yeah, give me tools around like, why am I always so anxious? Why am I so worst case scenario thinking? Can I do something to help ground me or regulate me so that I can show up better in my business because I love my business and this is the work that I want to be doing. And his suggestion to me was that I go back to school to become a therapist. And we can also acknowledge that's a really weird thing for someone to say. Very odd suggestion given the circumstances of that conversation and what I was looking for. But even beyond that, and like the bias that was so obviously infused inside of that being the suggestion he was giving me, hearing that from him triggered the living fuck out of me. I was so upset that he said that. I didn't show it, obviously, in the session, or at least I tried not to. I did in the way that I was like giving a lot of buts or like, oh, I don't know about that, and giving the reasons why, because, you know, I want to work in my business. If I went back to school, I wouldn't be able to work in my business anymore. And I don't know if I need to go back to school in order to do the kind of work I want to do and XYZ, blah, blah, blah. There were a lot of reasons why I didn't want to do it. But I remember getting off that call and sending like a 20-minute long voice note to my best friend about how triggered I was over his suggestion. And at this point, obviously being in the work, being a life coach at this point, having a pretty good understanding of resistance and triggers, there was a very obvious opportunity to explore what the hell was going on in me. Like, there's one thing if someone gives you a suggestion and you're like, oh, no, I don't think that's for me. But that wasn't my experience of it at all. It was like firing on all cylinders. No, how dare you even suggest that to me? That was my immediate response to it. And so I wanted to explore what that was really about for me. And a lot of it had to do with just the meanings that I attached to going back to school. And a lot of it had to do with that it meant that I failed. Like if I went back to school, that meant admitting defeat that I couldn't make it as a life coach and as a business owner. It also meant giving up on the lifestyle that was really important to me because I was being a digital nomad at the time, and it meant having to go back to school for several years and staying in one city and kind of putting my life on hold in a big way. And although just on the surface those things really suck, there was some deeper meanings attached to it as far as like coming back to the core needs, there was a lot of significance that I felt both from being a business owner and under the idea that I could be a business owner and be a successful life coach, even though I never went to university. There was something about that that felt like, wow, like I've made it. I'm one of the cool kids. I went against the grain and I bet on myself. And there's all of these things about it that felt threatened by the idea of going back to school. And also the sense of significance that I felt by just being the type of person that like owned her own business, worked online, traveled the world, didn't have a home, was a digital nomad, could go anywhere, live anywhere, work anywhere. And the idea of giving that up just felt like a huge threat to my identity and what made me valuable and like significant and cool and likable as a person. And so I was very easily able to identify that those were the primary points of reaction for me that made me so resistant and triggered from it. And because I recognized that those were points of trigger and resistance for me, there was this big voice inside of me that was like, well, if I'm so resistant and triggered by this, I probably should do it. And so, as much as I hated it, I was like, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do now. And there have been many moments in my life where I did kind of take leaps of faith in that way, where it was like something is so scary, so big, so triggering, so like it felt like so much of an ego death to me that I'm like, well, I guess I have to do it now. And then I kind of did it, and things turned out well for me doing those things. I'm not saying it's like that 100% of the time, but that's kind of the idea that I applied to this experience. And so I started exploring going back to school, started talking to people in my life that would able to help me understand what to do, how to do that, how to apply for grants, looking at what my life is going to look like, dates that I could apply, et cetera, et cetera. And as I started to settle into the reality and the identity that I would have to come to if I did go back to school, and I found some comfort in facing that, where it's like, okay, can I feel okay with myself if I go back to school and have to either take a step back or give up on my business? Can I still feel significant in myself? Can I still trust that there's something valuable about me, or that I am still divinely led, that it doesn't mean I'm putting my life on hold, or that I'm making a mistake, or that I'm going to regret it, or that I failed? Like, can I trust that those meanings aren't actually true, and that if I did go back to school, it would be a positive shift for me if that's what I'm meant to do? And I was able to access that and feel really much more comfortable inside of facing some of those things that felt like a huge threat to me. And once those things resolved themselves inside of me and I was fully convinced I was going back to school, I realized I don't actually want to do that. And that was a weird turn of events for me, where it was like, oh, I needed to have all of this evoked in me so I could work through it, get okay with it, and then make a different decision. It wasn't, I need to get triggered and then work through all the stuff inside me that's getting triggered and then go for it necessarily. It was more like the journey there, getting to the point where I would be okay going back to school. That was the purpose of that whole thing. And so when I really felt more grounded and more okay with the decision of me going back to school and what that meant for me, I started questioning, well, is that really what I want to do? Do I really feel like that's going to advance my career? Is that really the lifestyle that I want to live? Is it worth it to me to give up on the lifestyle that I'm living already? And the answer was no to all of those things. And so I tabled that decision and I kind of forgot about it for the last like 11 months since this happened. And literally in the last 18 hours. So this is very juvenile to me, but I love that we can just share our raw experiences on this podcast and talk about them. I have had the seed resprout, for lack of a better way of saying it, as far as going back to school. And it was funny because no one said it to me the same way that my therapist said it to me a year ago. It was more like my own thought said it to me. It was like, what if I go back to school? And my immediate reaction to it was like a split second of that same response, that no, how dare I even suggest that to myself? But it was so quick. Like it came and then it went. And it was like, oh, that could be a good idea. And there was something so different about it because I was able to recognize all the old meanings that I attached to it were no longer true for me, or I no longer saw them as true. And rather than seeing the potential of going back to school and pursuing a degree in something, meaning all of these terrible things about me in my life, like I failed, I'm not good enough, I couldn't make it as a business owner, I'm going back into the matrix, like all these different meanings that I attached to it, there was more of a, that would feel good to do that for myself. And that feels like an exciting new change in my life. And there are also benefits to me doing it now that I'm in Australia. I'd be able to stay in Australia longer. So that's a big side bonus to that. And it was just really interesting. And it is interesting because I'm still very much in the process of discovering and deciphering what this is for me. Um, so it's been really interesting to just notice how something that was so triggering and so like I had so much resistance to in the past, I've had a completely different experience of it a year later.
So my follow-up question to this is like the first time the idea of going back to school was brought into your awareness, it was massively uncomfortable. There was a lot of resistance there, and you've highlighted very clearly why, because it meant that A, B, C, and D about you. And you didn't want that reality to be true. And
That's right.
so you resisted the notion of of what it would mean to your sense of identity if you were to go back to school. And you resisted all of the feelings that would come along with that being your reality. And you shut it down and you said no. And then like a year went by, and then you had the same experience again where the idea came back into your sphere and your experience, I mean, there was like a split second of resistance, which was probably a pattern of
Yes,
thought,
yeah, that's what
right?
it felt like. Yeah,
And
just
it came
automatic,
and
like a
went.
voicemail.
Right. Yeah, it was just kind of like an automatic response that just kind of came and went. And then what unfolded for you was a very different experience of the thought with a lot less resistance. What do you think
Right.
the difference was between those two incidents? And what do you think led to the change in your level of resistance to them?
Mm. I love that question, and it's very clear to me what it was, actually. I'm just not sure how to decipher it in words, so bear with me. But it comes from this place of having already felt the discomfort of all of the things I was afraid going back to school was going to bring up for me. And the last year has made me face a lot of the discomfort and the aspects of myself that going back to school represented to me that first moment that it was brought up. There have been a lot of experiences over the last year that have threatened my sense of significance through being a business owner, through being someone that could make it work, through being someone that travels all the time and gets her significance through being that kind of cool person. And I've really had to face the potential reality that those things might not last in my life. And I've had to really move through the pain of that over the last year in lots of different aspects, both sitting with ayahuasca a couple of times in the last year, also through just going through really, really low times in my business, lower than I've ever had since I've been self-employed in the last 7 years, and having to really feel through what that brought up for me in real time. And so it feels like that discomfort that felt like so much of a threat, the discomfort of being back in school and putting my life on pause or moving a different direction, not just being like this self-employed digital nomad girl that just made things work and made it, made her life for herself and is all cool, but like someone that's going back to school to like do a normal thing and to like be broke for a while and take up a lot of her energy and time into studying and not pursuing her passions for a while or putting those on pause or scaling back on them or whatever. The discomfort of that doesn't feel like a threat anymore because I've felt it already in many different ways throughout the last year. And I've gotten more comfortable with it.
Right. You created a sense of acceptance around a feeling of, I mean, it could be a number of different things, but let's just use an example of I couldn't make this work in the way I originally wanted to, and therefore it's going to have to look differently.
Right.
And whatever you meant made that mean about you before, it was like touching a hot stove. It's like, ah, I'm not ready to go there yet.
Yeah.
And then over the course of the following year, you touched it a few more times. And the more you touched it, you could be with it a little bit longer. And the more you were with it, the less scary it felt because it's just a feeling, it's just a sensation with a story attached. And the more you could be with it, you found a sense of safety inside of it and acceptance of it. And now you can take a different action or make a different decision in your life, recognizing that the original pain associated with the story is not really present anymore because of the acceptance that you've been able to create within it.
That's exactly it. 100%.
So that being said, what resistance is and the way to work with it is a recognition that there is discomfort with an aspect of who you believe yourself to be that is creating pain inside of you, probably a little bit of shame.
Mhm.
And the resistance is showing you where that is. And the part of you that feels pain and discomfort, the part of you that is resistant to whatever is going on or the idea that's being presented to you is trying to protect the part of you in pain. That's what's happening. And the part of you in pain just wants to feel loved and accepted because that's all we ever want. And so when you're noticing that you're resistant to something, the ticket in is to let that be okay. Being in acceptance of the resistance that's present. Because once you can accept that there's resistance present, you move from resistance into acceptance. And that can feel counterintuitive because if you're accepting of your resistance, then that means it's never going to change. And then you'll be stuck with the reality that you're inside of. And then the pain that you feel will never go away, and on and on and on and on and on. But that story that you're telling yourself is creating the very cycle that you're finding yourself in. And so when you can accept that there's pain there, then you can learn how to presence it and be with it, because that's ultimately what you're trying to escape is the feeling of pain. And when you can be with your pain, you can find acceptance inside of it and love inside of it. And that's what transmutes the experience from a threatening one into a non-threatening one. And then you can access peace where you couldn't before. And that's where the resistance kind of dissipates.
Perfectly said. I'm just like, yeah, go on.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the the reality is so much of our human experience is in avoidance of the pain that lives inside of our body, that lives inside of our system, in our soul, whatever, different aspects of ourself. And I mean, when we really are honest and we look at this, this is the reason why there are so many problems in the world is our own avoidance of our own pain. That's why we have addiction. That's why we have certain patterns and these things that are so toxic or negative in our life are always, peel the layers back enough, coming to a way that we've learned to escape or avoid our own pain, our own discomfort. And so when we are moving through a season of life or a transition or an opportunity that's bringing up a lot of resistance, it can be used to help free us from something inside of our body that's perpetuating patterns, cycles, addictions, and ways of being in our life that are holding us back from being who we truly are and who we actually want to be and how we actually want to live in this human experience. Because if we're living our life in avoidance to pain, let me just give you a side that that's not bad and that's not wrong or shame ourselves for that because that's just part of the human experience. It really is. But it can be used as a wake-up call. And that's how you and I have both learned how to navigate through our own resistance is like it's like an alarm clock. When I feel resistance, it's like maybe not in the moment. I'm gonna be like, what is this? Because sometimes you just need to avoid it for a while.
Right.
But there's always that because we've moved through it so many times, we know there's value in getting curious with it. We know that there's something more painful about avoiding the resistance than facing it as well. And I think that has served as a reaffirmed incentive for us to continuously meet our resistance and allow ourselves to go there because we know that the discomfort we're going to feel for that period of time that we're really sitting with it is beyond worth it.
Resistance is the answer. It's where the answer lies. It's not a problem, it's the path towards the solution, which is always love, every time.
Always.
And sometimes you have to be resistant to your own resistance for a while to see that it's not working.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you and I having that acknowledgement in our own personal experiences has shaped our ability to allow that space for our clients and the people that we hold space for as well. And going back to that experience that we both have related to in the past, that we also see a lot of people in our field get caught up in, where we take over responsibility for another person's resistance and then we resist their resistance as a result of it. It's so much easier just to sit back and be like, okay. And be totally unattached, have this open, receptive, accepting, patient energy in approaching the resistance that's coming up for someone else because we don't need them to change in order for us to feel comfortable. And also, we know that them feeling uncomfortable doesn't mean anything bad about us or something wrong that we're doing. We almost can get excited about it more so because we're like, here we go. We're
Yeah, it's
on
like,
to something.
oh, they're on their journey and they're
Yeah.
finally feeling resistant. Like, that's amazing because after the
Yeah.
resistance comes the expansion. It's so cute that they're
It's so
finally in
cute.
resistance.
I know. I love that for
Oh,
them.
their world is falling apart. Oh, that's a sign that they're making forward progress.
Literally how I think now.
Me
But it's been
too.
proven 100% of the time,
Yeah, like
personally. And
you
yeah.
have to be detached from all the things that you're holding attachment to in order to find freedom from what you're attached to. And sometimes it's massively painful when you're experiencing the detachment
Yep.
and it requires time to find the acceptance inside of what happened. But when you can get there, it's like, oh my God, the freedom.
Yes. Absolutely.
Is there anything else you want to explore with this?
Nothing that I can think of off the top of my head because I feel like we went in a full circle
Yeah.
around what resistance is, how we've come up against it in different dynamics, being receptive to it, and then also being the one that's facilitating that resistance in someone else and then resisting that. Um, I think, yeah. Is there anything that you can think of?
I feel called to say something that might ruffle some feathers.
Let's do it then.
But this is my podcast, so I'm just gonna say what I want to
We
say.
we invite you to feel through the resistance that's about to come up as Amanda says this.
I love that reflection. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
We might be headed for a tumultuous few decades where there's going to be a lot of different opinions and different outlooks on life. And when when that results in chaos, that's because there's a lack of acceptance there. That's what that is. When someone else has a different opinion than you do, and that bothers you, that's because there's an that's a trigger, that's a resistance, a form of resistance. There's a part of you that's not fully in acceptance in that dynamic, inside of that dynamic. And so the answer to the peace that we all want inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves is acceptance. It's not us all to be on the same page and all to have the same points of view and all to want this. Well, we do all want the same thing, but we just want everyone else to want it in the way that we do, which is not, that's conditional. acceptance, not unconditional acceptance. And so when you catch yourself being in resistance to some of the maybe more chaotic, up and down turn of events that may be unfolding over the next few years, witness inside of yourself. Oh, I'm experiencing resistance to what's happening in what's unfolding around me. Presence it, feel the discomfort, and then remind yourself that that's okay. There's love available for you. There's peace available for you inside of that discomfort feeling that you're feeling. And it is through those three steps: awareness of the discomfort and the resistance, presencing of it, and acceptance of it, that you will find what you're seeking, which is love.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a very quick expansion onto that where we already identified when we have resistance over someone else's resistance. And I think it's even come up in this conversation where we start to have resistance of our own resistance. And I think that is an experience people that are kind of in the personal development world and even have language to describe their own resistance or trigger that we've had. Because it's like, oh, I'm resistant and I shouldn't be, because that means like I need to get over it. There's something here I need to look at, I need to get over it, but it's coming from that place of resisting it almost in a way. We use our own language to make it feel like we're not resisting it, like, oh, I'm feeling resistant. I need to release this, or I need to figure out what this is so that I can get over it, type of thing, which feels progressive, sounds progressive, but it's not really. And I think that what you're speaking into here, where we're moving into a time in the world where we're going to be met with a lot of opportunities to feel the resistance inside of ourselves. I think a lot of us are going to have the experience of just being like, "Ugh, again, like,
Yeah.
can I just be over this already? Or why can't I just let this go? Why can't I just accept? Why am I having such a hard time
Or
with this right now?"
why are they having such a hard time? Why is this happening again over there? So it
Good
goes
point.
both ways. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we move through that same process, acknowledging it, seeing that the resistance is there. And when we see it, we want to pop into the observatory point of view. It's not seeing it and then making it wrong and judging it. It's just seeing it. Oh, that's there. I'm feeling resistant. There's something uncomfortable in me that I don't feel safe being inside of right now. And presencing it. You can do this a variety of different ways, but the way that works the best for me is just to really notice the physical experience of resistance, the somatic, felt, embodied contraction where I'm holding tension in my body, and then just breathing, allowing it, welcoming it, allowing that contraction to be there, and then just allowing that to move through. And it's through the allowance of it and the not trying to get rid of it that you start to access through that acceptance a ground of love, which is what you were speaking into. And you find that love at the core of acceptance, in my experience. When you fully welcome something and you allow it, it's like, I can feel okay. I can feel peace. I can feel safe here. And all of that feels resonant with love to me,
Acceptance is not an absence of discomfort. Acceptance is an allowance of it.
right?
Peace is not an absence of pain or chaos. Peace is an allowance of what is.
Oof. Yep.
It's a really, really fine nuance that I think gets lost in the personal development space.
100%
Innocently,
agree. Very much
innocently.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just wanted to
That's a good
throw
one.
throw that in there.
Yeah. Brilliant.
I loved this.
I loved it too.
I
I
hope you
always
guys,
do.
yeah, I hope you guys got something out of this. I just want to say, like, the having this platform to discuss these things in detail has been so freeing for me. Um, because I have feel like I have a lot of stuff to get off my chest.
Same.
And I love being able to just express it with you. And so if you've been listening to this podcast and it resonates for you, can we hear from you? I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. And I'm also going to say this, like if you've enjoyed listening to this, feel free to leave us a rating and review. So that other people can find our podcast and maybe find a semblance of peace and acceptance inside of the conversations that we're having here. I would love to open up a dialogue with anyone listening if you're out there.
Yeah. All 19 of you subscribers on YouTube, we see you.
We
We
see
appreciate
you and
you.
we love you and we want to hear from you and we want to formulate like a connection with you. So don't be a
Very much.
stranger. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that plug.
Yeah. Thank you all so much and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.